The Magic Mirror. Chapter 1. The Miller of Tarvia. In the imagined land of Lirena, nestled between rolling hills and silver rivers, stood the quiet city of Tarvia. It was not a place of grandeur or bustling trade, but rather a modest settlement where life moved at a gentle pace. Among its humble inhabitants lived a solitary miller named Elmar. His home was a small stone cottage beside the old watermill, where the river Varnell flowed steadily, turning the wooden wheel with a rhythmic creak that had become the soundtrack of his days. Elmar was a man of few possessions and fewer words, but his heart was rich with appreciation for the world around him. He found joy not in gold or fame, but in the rustle of leaves, the shimmer of dew on morning grass, and the soft hum of wind through the valley. Each day, Elmar rose before the sun, tending to the mill with practiced hands. He ground grain for the townsfolk, repaired the wooden gears when they groaned from age, and kept the river's path clear of debris. Though his work was repetitive, he never grew weary of it. There was a quiet dignity in his labor, a sense of purpose that filled him with contentment. When his duties allowed, he wandered the nearby fields and forests, collecting herbs for tea and watching the birds that nested in the tall pines. He knew the land intimately, the bend of every path, the scent of each flower, the calls of the woodland creatures. Nature was not just a backdrop to his life, it was his companion, his teacher, and his refuge. Elmar had no family, no apprentices, and few visitors. Yet he never felt alone. The river spoke to him in murmurs, the trees offered shade and shelter, and the stars above seemed to wink at him each night. He often sat by the mill after sunset, sipping warm nettle tea and listening to the chorus of crickets. His thoughts were simple, his dreams modest. He wished only for peace, for the seasons to continue their dance, and for the mill to keep turning. One morning, as spring unfurled its green fingers across the land, Elmar set out on one of his usual walks. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of thawing earth and blooming violets. Birds flitted overhead, their songs weaving through the branches like threads of melody. He carried a small satchel, filled with dried bread and a flask of water, and wore his woolen cloak against the lingering chill. His steps were unhurried, his gaze attentive to every detail. The way the sunlight filtered through the canopy, the patterns of moss on the stones, the flutter of wings in the underbrush. As he ventured deeper into the forest, farther than he usually dared, something unusual caught his eye. Between two ancient oaks, a faint shimmer pulsed in the air, like moonlight trapped in mist. It was not the gleam of dew or the flicker of fireflies, but something more ethereal, more deliberate. Intrigued, Elmar stepped closer, weaving through the undergrowth with careful strides. The light seemed to beckon him, dancing between the trunks, leading him onward. He followed it without hesitation, drawn by a sense of wonder that stirred in his chest like a forgotten melody. The forest grew denser, the trees taller and older, their roots tangled like sleeping serpents. The air was cooler here, and the sounds of the outside world faded into silence. Elmar moved with reverence, as though entering a sacred place. The shimmer grew brighter, guiding him to a clearing where the ground was carpeted with soft moss and the light pooled like liquid silver. There, nestled among the roots of a gnarled pine, lay an object unlike any he had seen before, a delicate mirror, no larger than his palm, its surface glowing with a soft, inner light. Elmar knelt beside it, his breath caught in his throat. The mirror was framed in filigree patterns that seemed to shift and change, as if alive. Its glass reflected not just the forest around him, but something deeper, colors and shapes that did not belong to this world. He reached out, his fingers trembling slightly, and lifted the mirror from the moss. It was warm to the touch, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. In that moment, the forest held its breath, and Elmar felt the stirrings of something ancient and unseen. He did not yet understand what he had found, nor what it would mean for the days to come. But as he stood in the clearing, the mirror cradled in his hands, he sensed that his quiet life was about to change. The forest, the river, the mill, all would remain, but something new had entered his world. Something magical, mysterious, and full of possibility. And so, with the mirror tucked safely into his satchel, Elmar turned back toward Tarvia, unaware that the path he had walked so many times before would never feel quite the same again. Chapter 2. The Discovery in the Forest. Among the twisted roots of an ancient oak, Elmar discovered a mirror of extraordinary beauty. The tree itself stood like a sentinel in the heart of the forest, its bark gnarled and thick with moss, its branches stretching wide like arms embracing the sky. Elmar had wandered far from familiar paths, drawn by the shimmering light that danced between the trees. When he reached the clearing, he felt as though he had stepped into a place untouched by time. The air was still, the birds silent, and the forest seemed to hold its breath. The mirror lay nestled in a bed of soft moss, half hidden by fallen leaves and the curling tendrils of ivy. It was no ordinary object. Its surface was thin and delicate, like the petal of a spring flower, yet it shimmered with a light that pulsed gently, as if alive. Elmar knelt beside it, his fingers hovering above the glass. He was not a man prone to superstition, but something about the mirror stirred a deep instinct within him, a sense of reverence, of caution. Slowly, he reached out and lifted it from the ground. The moment his skin touched the frame, a subtle warmth spread through his hand, traveling up his arm and settling in his chest. The mirror was impossibly light, and its surface seemed to ripple faintly, as though it were made of liquid light. When Elmar looked into it, he did not see only his reflection. He saw flickers of emotion, memories, hopes, fears, woven into the image like threads of color. His face appeared surrounded by shifting hues, each one echoing a feeling buried within him. It was as if the mirror could read the soul, not just the skin. He turned the mirror slowly, examining its edges. The frame was etched with patterns that changed subtly as he moved it, revealing symbols he did not recognize. They glowed faintly, like embers in the dark, and seemed to hum with quiet energy. Elmar felt a strange mix of awe and unease. This was not something crafted by human hands. It belonged to another realm, one that brushed against his world only in rare moments. As he held the mirror, the forest around him began to change. The air grew thick, heavy with the scent of blooming flowers, roses, lilacs, and jasmine, all mingling in a heady perfume that made his head swim. The light dimmed slightly, though the sun still shone above, and a soft mist began to rise from the ground. It curled around his feet, drifted through the trees, and shimmered with faint colors. The atmosphere felt charged, like the moments before a summer storm, when the sky darkens and the wind holds its breath. Elmar stood motionless, the mirror cradled in his hands, as the forest responded to its presence. Leaves rustled without wind, and distant chimes echoed through the trees, though no source could be seen. He felt as though he had stepped into a dream, one that balanced on the edge of reality. The mirror pulsed again, and for a brief moment, Elmar saw a flicker of movement within its depths, a shadow, a silhouette, something graceful and fleeting. It vanished as quickly as it appeared, leaving him uncertain whether it had been real or imagined. He remained in the clearing for a long time, unable to tear his gaze from the mirror. Thoughts swirled in his mind, questions without answers. Who had left such a thing in the forest? What purpose did it serve? And why had it called to him? Yet despite the mystery, Elmar felt no fear. Only a quiet sense of being chosen, of having stumbled upon something meant to be found. He wrapped the mirror carefully in a cloth from his satchel and placed it inside, treating it with the same care he would offer a fragile bird or a sacred relic. As he turned to leave the clearing, the forest seemed to sigh, the mist receding and the light returning to its natural hue. The scent of flowers lingered, but the air grew lighter, easier to breathe. Elmar retraced his steps slowly, his thoughts heavy with wonder. The path back to Tarvia felt longer than usual, as though the forest had stretched itself to accommodate the moment. He did not speak, did not hum his usual tunes. He simply walked, the mirror pressing gently against his side, its presence a quiet reminder that something extraordinary had entered his life. By the time he reached the edge of the woods, the sun had climbed higher, casting golden light across the fields. The mill stood in the distance, its wheel turning steadily, unchanged and familiar. Yet Elmar knew that something within him had shifted. The mirror was more than a beautiful object, it was a key, a question, perhaps even a test. And though he did not yet understand its meaning, he felt the first stirrings of a journey that would lead him far beyond the boundaries of his quiet life. Chapter 3. The Appearance of the Enchantress. The forest remained hushed, wrapped in a veil of mist that clung to the branches and hovered above the mossy ground. Elmar stood still, the mirror cradled in his hands, its soft glow casting faint reflections on his weathered face. The air had grown heavier, filled with an almost sacred silence, as though the trees themselves were waiting. Then, from the depths of the fog, a figure began to emerge, graceful, deliberate, and otherworldly. She moved as if gliding, her feet barely disturbing the forest floor. Her cloak shimmered like moonlight on water, woven from threads that seemed to shift between silver and pale blue. The woman's presence was both serene and commanding, as though she belonged to the forest and yet stood apart from it. This was Liaria, the enchantress of the hidden glades, a guardian of ancient relics and forgotten truths. Her name was known only in whispers among the oldest trees and the deepest springs. Legend spoke of her as a being who walked between worlds, appearing only when the balance of magic was disturbed. Her face was ageless, neither young nor old, with features carved in quiet elegance. Her eyes, deep and still, held the color of distant lakes, calm on the surface, yet unfathomably deep. They did not blink or shift, but seemed to see through layers of thought and memory. Her presence did not stir fear, but rather a profound sense of reverence. As she approached, the mist parted gently around her, revealing the full grace of her form. Her hands were slender and pale, adorned with faint markings that pulsed with light. She extended one toward Elmar, not with force, but with quiet expectation. The gesture was clear, she sought the mirror. Elmar felt the weight of the moment press upon him. The mirror in his hands pulsed once, as if recognizing her presence, and its glow intensified. Yet something within him resisted. He sensed that the mirror was not merely an object of beauty or power, but a vessel of meaning, a key to something he had not yet understood. It had called to him, revealed glimpses of his inner world, and awakened questions he had never asked. To surrender it now felt premature, as though he were closing a door before knowing what lay beyond. He did not speak, nor did he move to offer the mirror. His grip remained firm, though respectful. Liaria did not react with anger. Her expression remained calm, but her eyes dimmed slightly, and a shadow of sorrow passed across her face. It was not disappointment in him, but a quiet sadness, as if she had seen this choice before, many times, and knew the path it would lead to. She lowered her hand slowly, letting it fall to her side, and turned her gaze toward the trees. The forest responded with a soft rustle, a breeze that stirred the leaves without touching the ground. Then, without a word or sound, she began to fade. Her form dissolved into the mist, her cloak blending with the fog until only the shimmer of her presence remained. In moments, she was gone, as though she had never been there. Elmar stood alone once more, the mirror still glowing faintly in his hands. The forest returned to its quiet rhythm, but something had changed. The air felt thinner, the light more subdued. He looked around, half expecting her to reappear, but the clearing remained empty. Questions swirled in his mind. Who was she truly? What was the mirror's purpose, and why had she come for it? He felt no triumph in keeping it, only a deepening sense of mystery. The mirror had chosen to stay with him, or perhaps he had chosen it. Either way, the encounter had marked him. He sensed that the enchantress had not come to take, but to test. And now, with her departure, the burden of understanding fell entirely upon him. He wrapped the mirror once more and placed it carefully in his satchel. The forest seemed to watch him as he turned to leave, the trees silent witnesses to a moment that would echo far beyond the clearing. Elmar walked slowly, his thoughts heavy, the image of Liaria etched into his memory. Her eyes, her silence, her sorrow, they lingered like mist in his mind. He did not yet know what path lay ahead, but he felt its presence, winding through the woods and into the unknown. The mirror pulsed gently, as if reminding him that the journey had only just begun. Chapter 4. The Power of Reflection. Upon returning to his modest cottage by the river, Elmar placed the mirror on a wooden shelf near the hearth, where the morning light could reach it. At first, he treated it with caution, glancing at it only occasionally, unsure of its nature and wary of its influence. But the mirror seemed to beckon him, its surface shimmering faintly even in the dim light of dawn or the flicker of firelight. It was not merely a reflective object, it was something alive, something that responded to his presence. Whenever he looked into it, he saw more than his face. He saw fragments of memories long buried, emotions he had not spoken aloud, and desires he had never dared to name. The mirror revealed layers of his being that he had never explored. It showed him as a child, running through fields with laughter in his lungs. It showed him moments of loneliness, of longing for companionship, of silent envy toward those who had families and friends. It showed him dreams he had once held, of travel, of learning, of becoming more than a miller in a quiet town. These visions were not static, they moved like scenes in a play, vivid and immersive. Sometimes, he saw himself in places he had never been, speaking words he had never uttered, living lives he had never known. The mirror did not lie, but it did not tell the truth in simple terms either. It twisted reality into possibility, and possibility into temptation. As days passed, Elmar found himself drawn to the mirror more frequently. He would pause in his work to gaze into it, losing track of time as he watched the shifting images. The mill, once a source of pride and rhythm, began to feel distant. The sound of the river, once comforting, now seemed dull. He stopped walking through the woods, stopped gathering herbs, stopped greeting the townsfolk who came for flour. His world narrowed to the space between himself and the mirror. The enchantment was subtle, not a spell cast with force, but a slow unraveling of his attention and care. His thoughts grew restless, tangled in questions and visions. He began to wonder what else the mirror could show him, what secrets it still held. He searched for patterns in its reflections, tried to predict what it would reveal next. The curiosity that had once been gentle and innocent became sharp and consuming. He no longer looked into the mirror to understand himself, he looked to be entertained, to be distracted, to escape. The mirror became a portal not to truth, but to illusion. And Elmar, once grounded and kind, began to drift. His neighbors noticed the change. The mill was often closed, the wheel unmoving. The bread they baked grew coarse without his flour. Children who once waved to him received no reply. Elmar did not mean to withdraw, but he no longer felt the pull of connection. The mirror had become his confidant, his obsession. He spoke less, smiled less, and moved through his days with a distant gaze. His kindness, once a quiet flame, began to flicker. He grew impatient, irritable, and dismissive. The man who had once found joy in the simple beauty of nature now sought only the strange and the hidden. At night, He sat by the hearth, the mirror in his lap, watching it until sleep claimed him. He dreamed of things he could not explain, of voices calling from beyond, of paths that led nowhere, of faces that changed shape. The mirror had awakened something in him, but it had also dulled something else. His sense of balance, of purpose, of humility, began to erode. He no longer asked whether he should look into the mirror, he simply did. And each time, he gave a little more of himself to its depths. The transformation was not dramatic, but it was steady. Elmar did not become cruel or dangerous, but he became hollow. His days lost their rhythm, his thoughts lost their clarity, and his heart lost its warmth. The mirror had not cursed him, but it had revealed the fragile threads that held his identity together. And in pulling at those threads, it had begun to unravel the man he once was. Chapter 5. Realization and Choice. The days had grown quieter in Elmar's cottage, not because the world outside had changed, but because something within him had begun to shift. The mirror, once a source of fascination and wonder, now rested on his table like a silent observer. Its glow had dimmed, or perhaps his eyes had grown accustomed to its light. He no longer felt the thrill of discovery when he looked into it. Instead, he felt a weight, a presence that lingered even when he turned away. One morning, as the mist rolled in from the river and the sky remained pale with early light, Elmar sat before the mirror once more. He had not planned to look into it, but his hand moved of its own accord, lifting the object and tilting it toward his face. What he saw was not the man he remembered. The reflection was his, but altered. His eyes were hollow, his posture slouched, and behind him loomed shadows that whispered of isolation. The room in the mirror was darker than the one he sat in, and the air around his image seemed thick with silence. He saw himself alone, forgotten, surrounded not by the warmth of nature but by the cold of detachment. The mirror had stripped away the illusions, revealing the consequences of his choices. It had not cursed him, but it had held up a truth he had refused to see. The enchantress Liaria had not come to reclaim a possession, she had come to warn him. The mirror was not meant for ordinary hands. It was a vessel of amplification, a lens that magnified whatever lay dormant in the soul. In Elmar's case, it had drawn out his curiosity, his longing, and his hidden fears, until they eclipsed the man he had once been. He sat in silence for a long time, the mirror resting in his lap. The wind outside stirred the leaves, and the river murmured its eternal song, but Elmar heard none of it. His thoughts were heavy, tangled in regret and understanding. He remembered the days before the mirror, his walks through the woods, his quiet joy in the rhythm of the mill, his gentle interactions with the townsfolk. He had not been a man of great ambition, but he had been whole. The mirror had not stolen anything from him, it had simply revealed what he had allowed to fade. The realization struck him with quiet force. His refusal to return the mirror had not been an act of defiance, but of blindness. He had mistaken possession for purpose, and in doing so, had lost sight of what truly mattered. Elmar rose from his chair, the mirror still in his hands. He wrapped it carefully in cloth, not out of reverence, but out of respect for the lesson it had taught him. He stepped outside, the morning air cool against his skin, and began walking toward the forest. The path was familiar, yet it felt different now, less like a route and more like a pilgrimage. The trees welcomed him with rustling leaves, and the mist parted gently as he passed. He did not hurry. Each step was deliberate, each breath a quiet affirmation of his decision. When he reached the ancient oak where he had first found the mirror, he paused. The clearing was unchanged, timeless in its stillness. He knelt beside the roots and placed the mirror where it had once lain, nestled among moss and fallen leaves. Then, with a slow and solemn movement, Elmar bowed his head to the wind. It was not a gesture of surrender, but of humility. He did not speak, for words were no longer needed. He hoped that Liaria, wherever she dwelled, would sense his choice, not as an apology, but as an acknowledgement. He had learned that true strength did not lie in holding on, but in letting go. The mirror remained where he had placed it, its glow faint but steady. Elmar turned and walked away, the forest closing gently behind him. He did not look back. The path ahead was his to walk, and he carried with him not a magical object, but a deeper understanding of himself. Chapter 6. A New Light. After leaving the mirror behind in the forest, Elmar returned to his cottage with a quiet heart and a clearer mind. The path through the woods had felt different on the way back, lighter, more open, as if the trees themselves had acknowledged his choice. The air carried the scent of pine and damp earth, and the birds sang again in the branches overhead. When he reached the edge of the village, the familiar sights of Tarvia greeted him with a warmth he had not felt in weeks. The river still flowed beside the mill, steady and strong, and the wheel turned with its usual rhythm, creaking gently as if welcoming him home. Elmar resumed his work at the mill with renewed purpose. The grindstone hummed under his hands, and the flour poured smoothly into sacks once more. The townsfolk began to return, bringing grain and greetings, and Elmar met them with a smile that had been absent for too long. Children lingered near the mill, watching the wheel spin and tossing pebbles into the stream. Birds returned to his windowsill, chirping and fluttering as they had before, and the scent of fresh bread once again filled the air around his cottage. Life had not changed dramatically, but Elmar had. He no longer searched for enchantment in hidden places or longed for visions beyond the veil of reality. Instead, he found wonder in the ordinary, the warmth of water on his hands, the golden crust of a loaf cooling on the table, the laughter of neighbors passing by. He began to walk through the woods again, not in pursuit of mystery, but in appreciation of the familiar. The trees, the moss, the winding paths, all felt richer now, not because they held secrets, but because they held peace. He gathered herbs with care, listened to the rustle of leaves, and watched the clouds drift across the sky. His thoughts no longer spiraled into questions without answers. They settled gently, like petals on still water. The mirror had taught him something profound, not through its magic, but through its reflection. It had shown him the parts of himself he had neglected, the desires that had clouded his judgment, and the strength he had forgotten he possessed. Elmar did not speak of the mirror to others. It was not a tale he felt the need to share. Its lesson was personal, etched into his memory like carvings in old wood. He understood now that true magic was not found in objects or visions, but in the ability to remain whole amidst temptation. To be kind without losing oneself. To see beauty without needing to possess it. His days unfolded with quiet joy, each one a gentle affirmation of balance. He no longer feared solitude, nor did he crave attention. He simply lived, present in each moment, grateful for the simplicity that surrounded him. The mill became a place of gathering once more. Travelers stopped to rest, villagers came to chat, and Elmar welcomed them all with warmth and humility. He listened more, spoke thoughtfully, and offered help without hesitation, but always with awareness. He had learned that generosity must be rooted in self-respect, and that boundaries were not walls, but bridges built with care. The enchantress had vanished, the mirror had been returned, and the forest had grown quiet again. Yet the light that now filled Elmar's life was brighter than any enchantment. It was the light of understanding, of peace, of being truly oneself. And so, the miller of Tarvia lived on, not as a man who had touched magic, but as one who had let it go. He had chosen the path of clarity over illusion, of presence over longing. The world around him remained the same, but his heart had changed. He no longer chased reflections. He embraced the real, the tangible, the gentle rhythm of life. And in doing so, he discovered that the greatest wonder was not in what he had seen, but in what he had become. Moral: true kindness is not the desire to possess a miracle, but the strength to let it go for the sake of inner peace. Not everything that glitters brings light. Sometimes, to preserve oneself, one must release what seems most precious. Thank you for your attention. If you like the story, please like and subscribe. It motivates us to make new videos and helps us promote the channel. Thank you.